The knife was still in the kitchen drawer when I found out. I stood there, staring at it, the same drawer where we used to hide Halloween candy from our mom, the same kitchen where she'd held me while I sobbed over a boy who didn't deserve my tears. I thought about how easy it would be to grab it, not to hurt anyone, just to have something solid in my hand while the world fell apart. I didn't take it. I closed the drawer. I sat on the floor, and I stayed there for a long time. Her name was Ji-yoon, is Ji-yoon. She's still alive. That's the part that makes it complicated. Betrayal is easy to process when the person disappears. You grieve, you move on, you build a clean wall between then and now. But she didn't disappear. She texts me sometimes. Happy birthday last April. A meme about coffee, like nothing happened. Like the last 3 years are just a gap in our conversation we can pick back up whenever we're ready. I've never responded. And my name is Amara Johnson. We met at 15 in a school where neither of us belonged. Two black girls in a sea of sameness, gravitating toward each other the way lost things do. Our skin, our hair, our voices marking us as different before we ever opened our mouths. In a world that had already decided how much space black girls were allowed to take, she was bold where I was quiet, loud where I was careful. She walked into rooms like she dared them to reject her, and I followed close behind, borrowing her courage like a coat. People knew her name first and mine second, and I didn't mind. Being second to Ji-yoon meant being seen at all. In a world that had already decided how much space black girls were allowed to take, being seen mattered. For 12 years, she was the first person I called. When my father got sick, when I got the promotion, when I found the lump, the terrifying one that turned out to be nothing, but for 4 days was everything, she drove 90 minutes in a storm to sit with me in a waiting room and hold my hand without saying a word. That's the kind of love I thought we had. The kind that doesn't need to explain itself. The kind that shows up. I was wrong about the kind of love we had. I'm not going to tell you what she did. Not yet. You'll want context first. The kind that makes it make sense. The kind that makes you understand why I didn't see it coming. The truth is messier than a single moment. It always is. But I'll say this. What she did wasn't a mistake. Mistakes are accidents. Accidents happen in a flash, before the brain catches up with the hands. What Ji-yoon did took months. Planning, silence, 100 small choices to keep going, to keep lying, to keep looking me in the eyes. That's the part I can't stop thinking about. The eyes. Because I know her eyes. I've watched them blur with grief and crinkle with laughter. I know what they look like at 2 a.m. when she's scared, and what they look like when she thinks something is funny but is trying not to show it. I thought I could read her like a language I'd spent my whole life learning. But she had a dialect she never taught me. And by the time I heard it clearly, by the time the words finally made sense, it was already too late. The damage was done. The version of myself that trusted completely, that loved without keeping score, that believed friendship was a safe place to be unguarded, that version of me doesn't exist anymore. I'm still deciding if I miss her. She called on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just been let go from a marketing job I'd spent 3 years pretending to love, and the severance they offered was an insult dressed in HR language. I was sitting on my kitchen floor, the same floor where I would later sit after discovering the truth about Ji-yoon, because apparently my body processes catastrophe, horizontally scrolling through job listings that all required 5 years of experience for entry-level salaries, when my phone lit up with her name. Her voice was warm, practiced. The exact frequency she used when she wanted something from you, but needed you to think it was a gift. Modeling, she said. Not the kind I was imagining, not runways and casting directors who looked through you like glass. This was corporate, private, high-end hospitality brands. Luxury hotels across Europe needed faces for their internal campaigns. Women who looked real, she said, not carved and starved. Women who could hold a champagne flute like they'd been born with one in their hand. Women like me. A black woman who had spent her life being told she was beautiful, but not marketable. The pay was extraordinary. I remember the number she gave me and how I made her repeat it, because I thought I'd misheard. I hadn't misheard. There would be a contract. Standard language. She promised she'd reviewed it herself. A 2-week trip. All expenses covered. First-class flights. Private accommodations. A photographer. A small crew. A handler to make sure I was comfortable. I wouldn't even have to bring luggage. Everything would be provided. You deserve this, she said. You've been treading water for years. And that was the cruelest part. Not the lie itself, but how well she knew me. She knew which words would dissolve my hesitation. She knew that "you deserve this" would slip past every wall I'd built, because I'd spent my whole life quietly wondering whether I did. She had 12 years of intelligence on me. She knew exactly where to press. I signed the contract that evening at her kitchen table. She made tea while I did it. Chamomile, my favorite. I didn't read it. Not because I was naive. I'd always prided myself on being careful, skeptical, the kind of woman who read the fine print. But Ji-yoon was sitting across from me, hands wrapped around her mug, watching me with that expression I'd known since we were 15. The one that said, "I've got you." The one that said, "You're safe with me." So I signed. 4 pages, 18 clauses, one very deliberate, very legal transfer of autonomy. I didn't read a single word. The car arrived before dawn. Black, unmarked. The driver didn't speak, didn't make eye contact, took my single bag and placed it in the trunk with the careful efficiency of someone who had done this exact thing many times. I told myself this was professionalism. High-end clients expected discretion. I told myself a lot of things in that car. The city was still half asleep as we pulled away from my apartment building. Streetlights flickered. Storefronts were dark. Somewhere, someone was starting a coffee machine. Somewhere, someone was waking up for an ordinary day. I was leaving mine behind. The airport terminal was private. I hadn't known such things existed for people like me, that somewhere adjacent to the chaos of international departures, there were quiet corridors with no queues, no fluorescent lights, no families arguing over gate numbers. Just polished floors. Soft music. Men in suits who nodded at me the way people nod at furniture. No one introduced themselves. No one asked for my passport in front of me. No one explained anything. I was shown to a seat on a plane that held no more than 12 passengers. The leather was the color of cream. The carpet was thick enough that my heels barely made a sound. There were fresh flowers in a small vase near the window, white orchids, and I remember thinking that was a strange detail for a business flight. Beautiful, but strange. The kind of beauty that exists not to comfort, but to distract. I placed my bag beside my seat and smoothed my skirt. I asked one of the suited men where we were headed. He smiled, said it was written in my itinerary. I asked which itinerary. He said it had been sent to my email. I checked my phone. No signal. I turned it off and on again the way you do when you're starting to feel foolish and want to give the situation one more chance to be ordinary. Still nothing. No bars. No Wi-Fi. No way to pull up the email I now desperately needed to believe existed. The doors sealed. There was a soft click. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just final. We lifted. The plane moved smoothly, efficiently, like a machine that had done this thousands of times and would do it thousands more without caring who was inside. I watched the city fall away beneath us. Buildings shrinking, roads turning into lines, lives continuing without me, and I felt, for the first time, the specific cold of a mistake you can't unmake. Not panic. Panic is loud, reactive, full of motion. This was quieter than panic. This was the feeling of a door closing softly at your back and realizing the handle is on the other side. I sat with my hands in my lap. I arranged my face into something that looked like calm, because calm was the only thing I had left that was still entirely mine. Hours passed. No one spoke to me. Food arrived, delicate, beautifully presented, impossible to eat. Tiny portions arranged like artwork. Sauces drizzled with surgical precision. Garnishes placed with intention. I pushed it around with my fork and drank water instead. I watched the clouds. Endless white, soft, indifferent. I mentally narrated myself from the outside, the way you do when reality becomes too sharp to face directly. A woman on a plane, well-dressed, composed, heading somewhere for work. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong. I kept the fiction going for as long as I could, but when we landed and I stepped off that plane into air that tasted like salt and heat and somewhere I didn't recognize, when a woman in a black dress handed me a room key and said, "Welcome," in a voice that contained no welcome whatsoever, the fiction ended. My instincts, which I had been systematically ignoring since the moment I stepped into that car before dawn, finally screamed. They screamed about the silence, about the lack of signage, about the men who flanked me without touching me, about the way everyone seemed to know where I was going except me. Nobody heard them but me. They dressed me like a painting. The room they gave me was not a cell, which was its own kind of cruelty. Soft lighting, a bed with too many pillows, a vanity framed in warm gold, curtains that filtered sunlight into something flattering and unreal. A woman came with a garment bag, another with a case of cosmetics so expensive I recognized the names from magazines I'd never been able to afford. They worked on me in silence. Efficient, unsympathetic, professional. They didn't ask my preferences. They didn't comment on my body. They didn't meet my eyes. They treated me like a surface. When they were done, they turned me toward the mirror without ceremony. I looked extraordinary. Not pretty. Not cute. Extraordinary. Like someone had taken everything I was and polished it into something that could be displayed. Something that could be owned. The dress clung in places it shouldn't have, revealed things I had always controlled, highlighted curves I had spent years being told were too much. My hair was styled into soft waves. My makeup was flawless. My skin glowed. I looked like money. I hated it. The room we entered was the most beautiful I had ever stood in. Red velvet draped the walls. Crystal chandeliers scattered light into fragments. The air smelled like expensive cologne and old wealth. Music hummed low in the background, no melody, just atmosphere. Around the perimeter, men stood in clusters, champagne in hand, conversation subdued. The kind of men who wear money the way other people wear skin. The kind whose faces are never in newspapers, but whose names are carved into buildings. Nobody looked directly at me, at first, and then everyone did. I felt it, the shift, the collective inhale, the recalibration of attention. I understood then, the staging, the timing, the theater of it. I had been walked in like a centerpiece, placed at the exact moment when the room was most ready to want something. A number was spoken. I didn't catch it. Another answered, higher. The crystal lights blurred. I had spent my whole adult life building something. A self, a competence. A quiet, hard-won sense of being a person who could not be reduced. I had survived a difficult childhood, a difficult father, and a world that taught black girls early how to shrink themselves to survive. I had survived all of it intact. I was not intact in that room. I stopped hearing the numbers. I started watching faces, cataloging, assessing, which ones looked at me with hunger, which ones with calculation, which one at the far edge of the room looked at me with something I could not name. He stood apart, not holding champagne, not speaking, not bidding. His features were unmistakably Korean sharp lines, controlled stillness, the quiet authority of someone raised in a culture where power is worn, not advertised. He watched, without expression, without urgency, as if he already knew the outcome. He spoke once, quietly, a single number. The room went still. No one countered. No one challenged it. He turned away before anyone confirmed, as if confirmation was unnecessary, as if doubt was foreign to him. The auction was over. I hadn't been asked a single question. I hadn't been given a single choice. I had been present for the complete transaction of my own life, and I had stood through all of it, in heels that cost more than my former monthly salary, looking devastating, saying absolutely nothing. I filed that away. The silence, what it had cost me, and what it had taught me. He never spoke to me that night, not in the hallway, not in the elevator, not in the underground garage where 3 black cars waited with their engines already running. He didn't look at me. Not directly. His presence was a pressure instead, a gravity, something that bent the space around it. I was guided, not grabbed, not shoved into the back seat of the middle car. The leather was cool against my skin. The door closed with a soft, expensive sound. No slam, no drama, just finality. The driver pulled away. The city blurred past the tinted windows. Neon lights, palm trees, luxury storefronts. A paradise built on other people's money and other people's silence. No one spoke. No one explained. No one congratulated him. No one told me what would happen next. I waited for instructions. They didn't come. I waited for threats. They didn't come either. The absence of both was worse. We drove for over an hour, out of the city, past resorts, past villas, past anything that looked like it belonged to ordinary life. Eventually, the road narrowed, wound upward, disappeared into hills. Then gates appeared, massive, iron, unmarked. They opened without the car slowing. Inside was another world, an estate carved into stone and greenery, lights embedded in pathways, security cameras disguised as lanterns, men stationed at intervals that looked decorative until you noticed how perfectly their lines of sight overlapped. We stopped in front of a building that looked like it had never known the word budget. He stepped out first. Still didn't look at me. One of the guards opened my door. I got out. The night air was cool. It smelled like jasmine and ocean. Beauty everywhere. Control everywhere. We walked through marble corridors, past walls hung with abstract art, past doors I would never open, past rooms I would never enter. No congratulations, no instructions, no explanations. Just possession, quiet, absolute, final. That was when I understood. The auction hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning. The estate sat behind walls that were too high to be tasteful. Limestone, polished, imposing. Surveillance infrastructure disguised as architectural detail. Cameras hidden in ornamental carvings. Sensors embedded in landscaping. Guards who moved like men trained to look relaxed while remaining lethal. Most of them spoke Korean among themselves. Rapid, clipped, efficient. A language sharpened into tool and weapon. When they spoke to me, it was in careful English. Neutral, controlled. Inside, it was extraordinary. That word again, extraordinary. I began to resent how often beauty was used as a container for horror. The floors were marble. The ceilings were high. The windows framed ocean views like paintings. Every surface was expensive. Every detail intentional. Nothing was accidental. Nothing was free. There were other women. 6 of us in that first month. Each claimed by different patrons. Each housed in separate wings. Each assigned an instructor. We saw each other in common spaces. At breakfast. In the gardens. In hallways. We learned quickly not to ask questions. Names were exchanged carefully. Histories were not. Mine was Renata. She was 40-something, sharp as a surgical instrument, hair pulled back into a severe knot. Eyes that missed nothing. She had the stillness of someone who had already decided Nothing would ever surprise her again. She never explained who she had been before this. I never asked. Renata taught me languages. Not conversationally, strategically. How to listen in rooms where you were not supposed to understand. How to recognize coded phrases. How to identify when a compliment was actually a warning. How to speak precisely enough that meaning couldn't be extracted and used against you. She taught me how to enter a room, not with bravado, with weight. Take up space before you speak, she said. They should have to accommodate you. She taught me protocols. Table placements for negotiations. Where to sit, where not to sit, when to stand, when to remain seated. How men of a certain class communicated hierarchy through objects. The watch, the pen, the chair, the direction of their body when addressing staff. Small codes, enormous structures. Once you learned them, you couldn't unsee them. Some days, the lessons felt like preparation for a world I despised. Other days, they felt like weapons. I chose, early on, to treat them as weapons. There were rules about movement. Hours during which we could not be in certain parts of the estate. Corridors that were always off limits. Rooms that required permission. Conversations with other women were permitted, but monitored. Not overtly. But I had become fluent in surveillance. I knew the hum of a room where someone was listening. We spoke carefully. We spoke in implication. We built a vocabulary of glances and pauses that the cameras couldn't translate. There were tests. I never knew when they were coming. A guest at dinner, a sudden request, a missing document, a raised voice, a sudden silence. Each was a test. The tests were not about obedience. I understood this only gradually. They were about composition, about whether you could hold your shape under pressure, whether the architecture of your calm would buckle or hold. The ones who buckled were quietly moved elsewhere. I never learned where. I did not buckle. I had been buckled once, in that auction room, in those heels, in the terrible theater of my own erasure. I had buckled precisely once, and in that moment I had decided, never again. This place thought it was breaking me. It was building the very thing that would undo it. Power, I discovered, has a grammar. You can feel it before you learn its rules, the way some people make rooms rearrange themselves without asking. I'd always attributed it to charisma, to personality, to some indefinable magnetism that certain people simply possessed. I was wrong. Power is learned. It has syntax, structure, rhythm, restraint. And once you understand its grammar, you cannot unhear it. Renata moved to economics in the 3rd month. Not textbooks. Real architecture. How money moved between men who never appeared in the same room. Shell structures. Layered corporations. Trusts. Foundations. The geography of offshore accounts. The way wealth was distributed through proximity to influence. How favor became currency. How information became the only commodity that could not be replicated or devalued. I had a mind for it. I hadn't known. There was something clarifying about learning the mechanics of the world that had consumed me. Like finally reading the instruction manual for a machine that had been running your life. The knowledge didn't make me complicit. It made me strategic. I learned negotiation, not the theatrical back and forth of business school simulations. The real thing. How to want something without revealing the want. How to let silence do work that words would ruin. How to make the other person believe a concession was their idea. Renata constructed scenarios. A property dispute. A hostile takeover. A contract with missing clauses. A partner who believed his leverage was stronger than it was. I worked through them, again and again, until strategy stopped feeling like performance. Until it became instinct. I was good. I was very good. One afternoon, she placed a scenario in front of me, more complex than any before. Multiple parties, conflicting incentives, incomplete information. Then she left the room. No timer, no instructions. I resolved it in 40 minutes. When she returned and reviewed my notes, she was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Yes, just that." The estate noticed before I did, the way conversations paused when I entered, the way guards made eye contact a moment longer, the way staff adjusted schedules around me. Small recalibrations. An ecosystem responding to a shift in weight. I fed it carefully. I did not rush. I did not grasp. I let power accrete. Slow, quiet, like ice thickening on water. He watched me through all of it. The man from the auction room. He appeared irregularly. A week gone. 3 days present. Gone again. He never interrupted lessons. Never commented on progress. Never interfered. But I felt his attention. A constant pressure, like a hand testing a door. His name, I learned later, was Daniel Kang. Kang Dae-hyun on official records. Korean-born, American-educated, feared in both worlds. I did not yield. I became fluent. I learned to speak power until rooms listened. Then I began composing sentences of my own. I found her name on a Wednesday. Mid-morning, coffee going cold beside me. The document was a payment ledger. Not one I was supposed to have access to. But Renata had taught me the architecture of information systems, how records were layered, where gaps hid, how permissions were disguised. I had been practicing, quietly, methodically, the way I approached everything now. The entry was 7 lines from the bottom, a date, a wire transfer, an account number, Source Kang Holdings, and a name, Ji-yoon Park. I read it 3 times, not because I doubted it, because I was giving myself time to break and watching myself decline. The number beside her name was significant, not life-changing, for the rich significant, life-changing for the desperate significant. Debt, ambition, both. I thought about her driving 90 minutes in a storm. I thought about chamomile tea. I thought about 12 years of closeness converted into currency, payment for delivery, for silence, for my life, directly to Daniel Kang's organization. Something had reorganized inside me over the preceding months of captivity. The woman who cried on kitchen floors had been moved to a quieter room. In her place stood someone architectural, strategic, precise. I did not cry. I photographed the document. I replaced it exactly. I returned to my room, opened my notebook, flipped to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote her name. Below it, a question. What does she still need? Because leverage begins with need. I planned for 3 weeks. Meticulously, patiently, I waited. Timing is everything. I was no longer impulsive. I was deliberate. No one hands you a throne. They talk about power as if it is conferred, a title, a ceremony, permission. That is a lie. Real power is what remains when containment fails. When circumstance runs out of room to suppress you. I did not escape. I exited through the front gate. Late autumn. Documentation in order. Assembled over months. Financial irregularities. Jurisdictional violations. Cross-border crimes. Names. Dates. Account numbers. The clean architecture of corruption. They let me go because the alternative cost more than I did legally, financially, reputationally, and strategically. That calculation was my first real victory. Not the leverage, the fact that I had made it. I had entered as property. I exited as negotiation. The car that collected me was mine. The destination was mine. Ji-yoon's reckoning came 6 weeks later. I will not describe it. Some things are not stories. They are balances cleared, debts settled. She understood. Not through guilt, through precision. I made sure misunderstanding was impossible. Without heat, without mercy. Heat would have meant she still mattered. She did not. I was changed, not improved. Redesigned, like a city after destruction. Recognizable, permanent. I carry the shape of what happened. I always will. but I carry it standing. I have an office now, 14 floors above a city I chose, tall windows, a silver river, people who work for me, paid fairly, protected. There is a drawer in my desk. Sometimes I open it and think about another drawer, another kitchen, another woman, deciding not to take a knife. She made the right choice. She made every right choice after that. Slowly, badly, then fluently, then with command. I am not owned. I am not afraid. I am extraordinarily, irreversibly, dangerously free.